Okay, so we are here at Pismo Beach. This is my son Darius, and we're going to be testing out different settings for low light. What we're really looking for is not only the best settings for overall image quality, but also considering with the 360 where the stabilization, I've noticed that sometimes in certain settings you can get some blur with motion, and so we're going to be looking for the best settings that reduce the blur but also give the best overall image. So trying to find the right, what would you say, balance between the two? Yes, sounds good. All right. Okay, so the only issue that we're going to run into is there's a little bit of cloud cover and a little bit of moisture in the air, so every now and then I'm getting dropped, so I'm wiping the lens every chance that I get in between each of these. Anyway, so we're just going to run through the settings real quick. This is Pro Tune default, which means we have an ISO min of 100, max of 1600. Shutter is on auto, EV is 0, white balance is auto, sharpness is on high, and the color is GoPro. Okay, so with the Pro Tune default, we're doing a little walking and I'm moving the camera around, so we're gonna see what happens as far as motion blur and the overall image quality. Okay, so now we have an ISO max of 800, down from the 1600 that we just had, and we're just gonna continue doing our walk and talk and see how this looks. Okay, so it's kind of bright right here. We have dropped the ISO max. What did we just go to?
From 800
to 400. So now we are in ISO max 400. Okay, so now we have ISO max of 200 with the GoPro Max. And we're gonna walk a little here and see how this turns out. We're gonna go ahead and move into this brightness too, just so we can get a little variation. And then we're also looking at stabilization and if I'm getting any motion blur. Okay, so there are some roof lights here as we're walking. This is ISO max 100 on the GoPro. Everything else is in the default Pro Tune settings. Let's go down this street over here. We get a little darkness going. Okay, so now I have locked the ISO min and max to 1600. We're walking around here. So this isn't bad, but we're gonna run across the street over here to the surf shop because it's pretty bright over there. And so we'll see what happens though when we have both locked to the same high ISO. Then the exposure is going to get really bright, although it's not too bad. But then we're also concerned, since we have such a high ISO, is that 1600 going to be introducing too much noise. Okay, and so now we have ISO min and max locked to 800. Let's go across the street again to the darkness and get some movement. If you're wondering what my son's doing back there with that paper, I have all these settings written down and he's making sure we cover them all. Yes. Okay, so this is ISO min and max 800. Okay, so now we have ISO 400 min and max locked on it. Coming over a little bit of color here, do a little bit of movement, and there is definitely a light, very light rain coming down. We'll move through some darkness here, or at least some darker. The sun has set, so the only light we have is coming from the shops here. And one of the reasons that I chose this spot is so that we can get these neon lights. Neon lights tend to be the worst type of lighting for these cameras, so I really wanted to be able to challenge the max the best that I could. Okay, so now we have the GoPro default set, but we have an EV of -2. Let's go ahead and run across the street here and see if having that lower EV reduces, or actually not reduces, speeds up the shutter, so to help us avoid some of that motion blur with the stabilization. Okay, so same Pro Tune default, but EV negative 1.5. We'll pop in here. Ooh. Okay. Pop out. Excuse us. Hey, buddy. Okay, so now we have the EV at -1, but we need to get over to that darkness again. We're just gonna keep doing circles right here on the street. Okay, let's go. And into some darkness. Okay, so this is -0.5 on the EV. Everything else is Pro Tune defaults. We'll check out a little bit of motion blur and see what the overall image looks like. Okay, so now we're doing what seems to be the more intuitive thing to do, and that is raising the EV to make the image brighter. And it's not a bad idea as far as getting a better image, more details, but the problem is then we're probably slowing the shutter down, which might increase the motion blur. Okay, and now we have a +1 on the EV, and we'll do a little quick walk. Maybe we'll go down this street now. And it's definitely, looking at the image, it's definitely bright.
Yeah.
So it's brighter, but again, the concern is about that shutter speed and if we're inducing more motion blur. Okay, and so now we are at EV plus 1.5 with the GoPro Max. And I'm gonna actually hang out in the same spot for this one and then the +2. So that would be the +1, +1.5, and the +2, just so we can see how this looks. But we will move the camera around a little bit to see how we do with the motion blur. Okay, and now we are at EV +2 with the GoPro Max, everything else Pro Tune defaults. And we'll do a little spinning the camera around to see how much motion blur we get. And it's brighter, looks pretty good. And then just for comparison, this is EV -2 in the same spot. So you can see the difference in brightness for sure. But we're gonna go ahead and move the camera around to see what kind of motion blur we get. And actually you can see in the LCD, the lights back there, they don't seem to be dancing as much and as blurry. So it might be a good thing, I don't know. Okay, so now we have the shutter at 1/30. This is the slowest that you can manually set the shutter to, but that would also mean that this is the most motion blur that can be induced into the camera as well. So that's a concern. Doing a little movement with the camera right now, spinning it, and we're gonna move through our shutter selection. Okay, so now we're at a shutter of 1/60, which in this situation, most people would consider what they call the 180-degree shutter rule, which is doubling our shutter from our frame rate. So we'll do that, and we'll look around real quick and with a little bit of camera movement. Okay, so Pro Tune defaults, but now we are at a shutter of 1/120. This should be improving the motion blur, but as you can see, definitely the image is getting darker as there's less light to expose to the sensor. And most likely also the camera's gonna start favoring the higher ISO with a max of 1600, so we'll see what the overall image looks like. Okay, so typically this is my go-to setting in low light when I want to have stabilization and avoid having too much of that motion blur, and that is 1/240. And I've found that in any GoPro camera with the hyper smooth stabilization, you need at least 1/240 to get that kind of stabilization so that you don't completely ruin the image. Most of the hero cameras, or all the hero cameras, the 6, 7, and 8, they all automatically drop the degree or the amount of stabilization. I'm not so sure about with the Max as the low light kicks in, but if we lock the shutter, we can stop it from being able to do that. Okay, so Pro Tune defaults, now we are at a shutter of 1/480. And typically, most of these settings, the brightness has actually looked pretty good, hasn't been too bad. But now I can see that it's definitely darker, what do you think, than what it should be, than our actual lighting is. But we'll see if the theory is correct about the faster shutter and the stabilization as we move the camera around and see are we getting a whole lot of motion blur with this. Okay, so again, we are in Pro Tune defaults, but now we are testing out the sharpness. So this is sharpness low on the GoPro Max with the Pro Tune default and a little camera movement there. So things to look at, we can look at the signs across the street there, and the lighting on these buildings, and that's really where we're gonna see most of the difference with this sharpness. Okay, so now we are in sharpness medium with the GoPro Max with Pro Tune defaults, and moving the camera around, and then we'll go ahead and we will take a look at the signs across the street. That's a little bit of cheating with that car's light. So, okay, so there's Harry's nightclub and beach bar across the street. You got Brad's down there, and the world famous Splash Cafe over the street there. And then back to Darius and I. This sharpness on high. There is Harry's nightclub and beach bar, swinging around, and then we can look over at Brad's seafood restaurant, and then of course the Splash Cafe, world famous, and the Cool Cat. Got to give them credit too. Pretty cool. Okay, and then back to Darius and I. Okay, so now we are spot metering to the lens facing away from us. And that is going to be the hemisphere spot meter, and so we've got that locked on. Right now you're looking at Darius and I, but we're going to swing it around to the other side, and that is the side that has the spot meter on it. And so there is Harry's nightclub and beach bar, and Brad's, and then of course Splash Cafe, and we'll do a little movement. All right, got a lot of rain. Okay, so now what I've done is I have spot metered to the dark night sky, and so as we move around here, the camera is overriding all the settings in favor of that spot meter, so that as I go into brighter areas, it's still keeping the exposure set for the dark night sky, which probably is going to be a lower shutter, and so I would suspect that we're going to have more motion blur with this one right here. Okay, so now we are spot metered on me right here about at my chest, and we're going to do a little moving around here. So as I go in and out of darkness, it's not locked, so it is going to be adjusting accordingly to the brightness right in my chest area right here. So hopefully we're able to get decent brightness on our faces, which would be good if you're going to do a little vlogging with this camera. The only danger behind that is, of course, if the other side is considerably brighter than we are. But in general, this is a good way to make sure that you have a good exposure, because as I walk over here into this much brighter entryway, breezeway to Poncho Surf Shop, you can see that the sharpness maintained, or sharpness, the exposure maintains pretty well. Okay, so now we are doing the same routine again, but we're going to be doing everything with the GoPro flat color profile. Now the advantage to the flat color profile is not only can you do better color grading, but it also uses a, what would you say, a wider S-curve. So the dynamic range is greater, but that also means in low light you can get more noise, and so there's a trade-off for that. So generally you'll get more detail in shadows and darkness, but the trade-off is you also end up with more noise in those areas, or for classic film what they'd call grain. So this is Pro Tune defaults with a flat color profile. Okay, so now we are Pro Tune defaults with a flat color profile and the ISO max set to 800. So we walk around a little bit. We're at Pismo Beach. I'm losing you. Okay, and so now we have ISO max 400 with the GoPro Max with a flat color profile. Come around the corner here.
Eight patties, 8 cheeses, and you have half an hour to complete it.
We're back to our little Cool Cat Cafe section. Okay, GoPro stop. And now we have ISO max 200 with a flat color profile. It's not a bad ISO, but as you can see, as we move into darkness, everything does get considerably darker. It's actually not too far off from the actual color or brightness for our location here, but you're not going to get a lot of detail, so it's probably not something you're going to want to use. Plus, I would suspect that it would force a much longer shutter time, and that would give you more motion blur. GoPro, stop. Okay, we're gonna keep this one quick. This is Pro Tune defaults except for an ISO max of 100 and a flat color profile. It's pretty dark, it's nighttime. This should be a cleaner image, but even though we have a cleaner image, it's a much darker image. So okay, so now we have a min and max of 1600 with the GoPro Max, Pro Tune defaults otherwise, and a flat color profile. Yeah, so not going to do a whole lot with this one because it's suspected that it's going to be pretty noisy. And then as we come into the brighter lights, most likely we would expect that it gets a little too bright. But if we come across the street where it is a lot darker, it definitely is giving me plenty of brightness, because I can see on there. And actually Darius in the LCD looks brighter than he does to my naked eye, so that's pretty good. Okay, and now we have the ISO min and max locked to 800 with a flat color profile on the GoPro Max. And now we have the ISO min and max locked to 400 with a flat color profile on the GoPro Max. Round them here. Okay, so now we have Pro Tune defaults with a flat color profile but an EV of -2. So we'll see how this looks and if it affects the motion blur with our stabilization. And now we have an EV of -1.5 with a flat color profile and the GoPro Max. Everything else is Pro Tune defaults. Move into some darkness over here. Okay, it's a little darker over here. It's in shadows. Man, it's really bright on the LCD though. And now we have EV -1. Yes, it's amazing. Okay, and it's pretty dark right here. I'm really surprised at how bright we are in the LCD.
-1 or EV regular?
This is -1. We did -1.5 a second ago. Okay, and so now this is flat color profile with an EV of -0.5. Okay, so here we go. This is actually a pretty dark spot. I mean, there is some lighting over here, and then there's lighting across the street. But as far as looking down, I mean, my shoes are dark. I can barely see my shoelaces, so. It is a lot of recordings. Okay, so flat color profile, Pro Tune defaults with an EV of +0.5. Rock on, rock on. Okay. And now this is EV +1 with the GoPro Max and a flat color profile. And now we're at EV +1.5 with the GoPro Max and a flat color profile. And now we are Pro Tune defaults with a flat color profile and an EV of +2. As we're moving around here. Okay. Get back to our little spot here. By Harry's Nightclub Beach Bar. Okay, so here we go. So this is with a flat color profile and a shutter of 1/30. All other Pro Tune defaults are the same. Starting to rain on us, so we're gonna speed this thing up. And then we're going to look at what the motion blur looks like. Okay. And now we have the shutter at 1/60. So this is our 180 shutter angle rule for our natural motion blur. So we'll just spin the camera around a little. And now we are at shutter 1/120, flat color profile. We'll move the camera around a little, looking at our motion blur, see how everything looks. Let me go ahead and clean the lens here. All right. Okay, so my personal preference when it comes to wanting to get footage with stabilization so that I don't get too much motion blur, and that is a shutter over 1/240. And we'll see how that looks. And this should give us the best stabilization right here. This is a flat color profile, but a shutter 1/480. And so we'll just spin it around. Our beach homeless and their dogs. Such good owners. Okay, so this is ProTune defaults with a low sharpness, but color is on flat. So we can look across at Harry's Nightclub and Beach Bar like we did before, Brad's Seafood, the Splash Cafe, world famous, and then of course the Cool Cat Cafe behind us. Okay, so ProTune defaults with a flat color profile, and now we have medium sharpness. So we'll swing it around, look at Harry's Nightclub and Beach Bar, and then over to Brad's Seafood, and then over to Splash Cafe. It's kind of weird how I'm not moving the camera, but I'm saying that we're looking around at different stuff. Isn't that weird?
360.
Yeah, 360 baby. And then of course back to the Cool Cat Cafe. And then finally we have high sharpness with a flat color profile. It's raining on us, probably getting some drops on the lens. I think I can see one over there right now. Okay, so high sharpness, flat color profile, over to Harry's Nightclub and Beach Bar, then to Brad's Seafood, to the Splash Cafe, and then back over to the Cool Cat Cafe. Okay, so now we are with the flat color profile, but we are spot metering to the outside lens. So that's across the street over to Harry's. Wipe down. Okay, so the spot meter is over there at the Harry's Nightclub and Beach Bar. And then we'll go ahead and we will swing it around to look at Darius and I. Hi. And so then we can see how that lighting looks. Go. Okay, let's go, Darius. Okay, so now what I've done is I locked the exposure to the night sky. So we have flat color, but the exposure is locked already. So there's no adjustment that will be made. So as we cross the street and go into brightness, odds are it's going to be overexposed and not looking right. Plus, we'll probably also have a very slow shutter. And I can already see, look how we got so overexposed. Whoa. Okay, and so now we are exposing to my shirt right into this area, but it is not locked, so it can adjust. So as we move around through different brightness, the family probably thinks I'm recording them. She's like, why? And then we'll go through. This is now considerably darker right here. And so it should be adjusting the brightness as we move around. This is the flat color profile. So we'll see how this goes. And is this the end of our test?
I think we have one more. Is it the vlog spot? Or are we doing that?
This is the vlog spot right now. So this is the end of our test. Hope that this video proved to be helpful to you. I know this is another long one, but we're gonna have a conclusion video coming up next very soon. So stay tuned for that as well. If you have not already, please subscribe. I'm trying to get to my 1,000 subscribers so I can do the live streaming test with the YouTube. So I'd appreciate that. And also leave a like, or you can even leave a thumbs down. But all I ask is that you leave a comment. Comments are important. Let me know what you'd like to see. I have just about every GoPro accessory available, and I have pretty much all the cameras as well, so I am more than willing to go ahead and make videos to answer your questions the best that I can. Anyway, thanks a lot, and we'll see you later.
Bye.
GoPro, stop recording.